Peace, peace, peace. So I wanted to share, while it was fresh on my brain, another thing that has led me on this particular spiritual journey. And part of it is that I know I've always been a seeker. And so I can look at a few different places in my childhood, from childhood to middle school, uh, that have moved me in the direction that I've been heading in the direction I'm moving in. When I was in I'm from a generation where our parents, there was not internet when I was a little girl. So my children are the same from the 1900s. But my parents were kind enough and forward thinking enough to buy us a whole set of encyclopedias. And I don't know if they were Britannica, they were red with gold lettering. And I remember somewhere in those encyclopedias, there was a whole section on like traditional dress or something. And it caught my attention. I remember drawing the traditional dress of like maybe about 8 nations, somewhere in China, Kenya, uh, somewhere in maybe Switzerland, but about eight, where they had a picture of a man and a woman in their traditional dress. And I was flabbergasted. I was amazed at the colors. I was amazed at the detail. I was amazed at how um, unique many of them were, distinct, many of them were. And so I remember that. I also remember in middle school, Senor Hustes, who was our seventh and eighth grade Spanish teacher, with a very thick accent and very thick glasses. So sometimes it seemed like he wasn't always there with us, but I remember he would teach lessons about Mexican tradition. And I remember thinking, what is my tradition? What is my tradition as an African American girl? What is my tradition? And I was looking real hard. I would that I remember was one of the things that spearheaded me into what is it that I'm looking for. I was also thrilled. Somewhere in there, I was reading the autobiography of Malcolm X. I was reading about the African National Congress. I was drawing pictures of Mandela and the ANC on my assignment book. I'd done a paper for one of my classes on the ANC, which I ended up getting a C on because it was not African American history; it was South African history. But I remember there being a distinct hunger, looking for what reflected me. And even the first time I heard the word animism in school, and I was like, animism, what does that mean? And so the idea that spirit is recognized in different uh, places in nature, in water, in trees, in rocks, was not something that I had learned in church. Of course, there are songs that speak to the rocks crying out, where Christ is spoken to as water, um, where, songs like I'll Fly Away, where there's, of course, the imagery of being a bird or those kind of things exist in the church and especially in the Black church. But there was no one that was speaking to it. And if they were, I just wasn't keen. Speaking to it in the way of honoring the creator of the spirits in nature around me. So I remember that word sticking out. When I was in church, I told you, shared with you all before that I was raised in the south suburbs of Chicago, so my parents were pretty diligent in making sure we had Johnson publications, so Black Like Me comic books and books about history, heroes and sheroes in African American history, well, and African history throughout the diaspora. A lot of books that showed us our own images, and so in the church I grew up in, we used uh, curriculum that had representations of the characters in the Bible that were Black with kinky hair and wide noses and rich dark skin. So I didn't have as much of a leap to come from my perception of spiritual pioneers or um, representatives, pictures of a human incarnation of the creator and them all looking like me and the people around me. I do remember asking I do remember asking Miss Donna Thompson, who's one of my Sunday school teachers, why do we believe what we believe? And I was probably really wonderful and teenage about it. 'Cause whatever answer she gave me that was very pat did not feel like it was enough. And I was like, well, what makes us Baptist outside of the name on the sign outside? And I couldn't differentiate. And that those answers didn't even start coming until later as I got older. But all of these things were pointing me toward a cultural identity outside of the things that popular society loved to siphon off of African American culture, pointing me toward traditional expressions of culture in dress, in music, in recognition of the natural world and the sacredness of the natural world, pointing me toward representation of something that was uniquely mine, uh, of tradition, of practice, of rituals that were uniquely mine. I remember one of the things that popped out. This was about seventh or eighth grade. That popped out that made me think, "Well, that's mine," but it's in, like, popular culture. There was a phone commercial when I was in 7th grade, and it had, this was at the point where we were still using calling cards to call long distance from one place to the next, and in this commercial, the brother who was making his phone call was pulling out, like, a phone card that was attached to some national phone company, and he started stepping. He started doing you know, uh, fraternity, sorority, step team type stuff in the commercial. And I was like, something in me said, well, that's ours, but it's in this commercial. So like, where is the secret sacred that's ours? Not that I have any problem with, I love stepping. And then of course, once I learned it originated in gumboot in South Africa, and that so many of us throughout the diaspora, and especially in uh, African American HBCU culture have been exposed to or practiced step. In our homeschool co-op, our children stepped to share the principles of Kwanzaa. So I appreciate it. I just wanted to know what was mine, what was secret, what was sacred. Is this even on? No. um, what was secret? What was sacred? What belonged to us? And so those things sent me from my childhood understanding, the proverb that was shared in the first video about no one teaches a child God. And even as I was getting that video ready to post, I was thinking, and a little child shall lead them. Um, so even with those truths reflected in everyday life, in the childhood wonder and revelation of the divine, I also realized there was a part of me that was seeking cultural expression and something that would be secret and sacred for me and mine. And at that point, I was mining the practices that were happening in my family. I was looking at things we would do in church, things we would do as family, things that I would see in popular culture, and I was looking for the origins. And that was as early as elementary school and middle school. And so that's what sent me on my path to return to myself, to Sankofa, to move further into myself and to move away to bring back, to continue on the journey to bring back. So I will continue sharing about this. It is I want you to think about the things that have guided you in the direction that you've moved in your relationship with the divine, in the relationship with yourself, the practices that you move through, the feelings that you have. Are they feelings of connection? Are they feelings of fear? Are they feelings of avoiding chastisement or punishment, and looking at where those things come from so that we can empower ourselves in the things that we practice and the things that bring us peace and the things that allow us to step outside of what we see every day around us, which can be very jarring, and to be able to see what's behind, to feel what's running through, to feel what's underneath, and to, um, one of my teachers said, we don't practice, we don't practice our traditions to avoid difficulty, challenges. We practice them so we can ride the wave. We practice them so that we have an understanding and a way of navigating the world so that we are not being overcome by the water, but that we are moving on it and with it and understanding it. So I want to encourage you to reflect on your own journey, your own spiritual journey, your own practice. And if you have any beautiful young people around you, to allow them the space to evolve, to give them the space to open up, to understand where they are, and to continue to evolve as they do and their understanding of their own spiritual relationship and their own spiritual practices. So again, this is Reverend Akonfo, Malini Yogi, Sister Mama Adia, saying, I'll see you soon. Peace.